live streaming.
Speaking of which, Rabbi, could you please post last week's class because I wasn't able to make it?
Yes, I meant to send it, and then I realized that I didn't have easy access to it. So I just, but yes, I will send today's. I will send today's and next week and last week's soon. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I hope everything is okay.
Yes, my daughter was visiting, and I'm sorry she had priority.
Of course. I mean, that's wonderful news. I'm so glad to hear that was the reason. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was great to see her. I haven't seen her since the pandemic.
Right. Wow. I mean, people are beginning to. I mean, I feel myself to be so blessed because my parents are in Cambridge, so I've seen less of them than I used to, but now that everyone is vaccinated, we're back on track, and it's not such a big deal because we never really completely stopped seeing each other, just sort of changed the mode. But for so many people who don't live nearby with one another, it's a completely different deal. So, all right, so we'll get started. We'll pick up where we started last week. So we'll review the rest. We'll review the rest of the Friday evening at home service. What I sent around today, and we can go through a little bit of that as well. And please let me know. It would be easier if you let me know by email. If you'd like, if you're at CCB and you'd like me to print off a copy of these for you, please let me know, and I'm happy to do it. But let me know by email, because otherwise it'll just get lost in the shuffle. But so what I've included in the mailing that I sent this morning is not only the blessings before, but also a shortened version of the grace after meals. Which is a nice thing to do. One of the great things about, as I mentioned last week, about Shabbat dinner is that there's singing around the table, which can be really a fun way to spend some time. And again, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it depends on your perspective. But in traditional families, everyone sings, whether or not they're quote unquote able to sing. And so tuneless singing is not frowned upon. So again, is that a good thing, a bad thing? It is what it is. I always try to encourage people to participate in singing, even if they feel that they are not good singers, but not everyone is as shall we say, as encouraging as I am. Even I am not as encouraging as I am sometimes, depending on people's voices. But in my rabbinic mode, of course, I encourage everyone in my own house, around my own table, maybe a little different. So let's continue where we left off last week, which was, I believe, with the beginning of the Kiddush prayer, right? So there is a tradition, right, that we don't have a celebration in our tradition without wine. There is just to sort of be clear about this, right? That yes, on one hand, we don't have a celebration without wine, and on the other hand, that if someone struggles with drinking too much wine, grape juice is 100% acceptable, and you will run into arguments that on Passover or on Purim it's not okay to not drink, but remember, my attitude is that And I think the majority of the tradition would agree, right, that health is the most important thing, right? That keeping your body and your spirit healthy is the most important thing. So, if it's any kind of a struggle, the grape juice is completely acceptable. And
Tim,
so
where is it said that the alcohol part is essential? Because pre-hagafen is the fruit of the vine, and that's the grapes.
right. That's a good question, Lori. I just know that there is a that when people say Barei Pri Hagafen, it usually does mean wine, right? That it's specifically wine and not grape juice. That grape juice is a substitute. And I think that it's probably
is it because it's a fruit? Grape juice?
No, I don't. I mean, I am not on solid ground here, but I'm just going to shamelessly speculate that it is similar to hamotzi lechem min haaretz, right? That it's about the human sort of human divine partnership, right? And in most cases, right, the bread we eat involves yeast, right? It doesn't involve yeast that we went to the supermarket and picked up those little paper packages, right? For those have only been available for about a century, right? It used to involve this sort of miraculous, seemingly, process whereby the bread got fermented in rows, right? And I think it's probably similar vis-a-vis the wine, right? That it's not simply just grape juice, right? It's that process of viniculture that transforms the grape juice into wine.
I'm going to say something here. When I lived in Spain, there was no yeast available to the public.
Yeah.
You had to either make your own, or you had to get the little packages sent to you from the United States.
Right.
Wow.
You could not get yeast in Spain.
And
It was not available.
It
was controlled by the Bakers Guild.
Wow.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So
I don't know now because I haven't lived in Spain for quite a few years.
Right.
But
right. I mean, it's a fascinating question. Yeah.
So it's the same thing, it's special.
Yeah. Right. And and obviously it's not by any means impossible to develop a sourdough starter. People do it all the time.
Right.
But it is a lot less convenient, right, than just tossing in the instant yeast from the jar that I keep in my refrigerator. So anyway, but yeah, so that has to do with the wine. All right, so this blessing, or actually it's really what constitutes a Kiddush, right? So one of the things that happens on Shabbat and on festivals, right, and on is that we have a little reading from the Torah, right? So on Shabbat morning, right, it's the Shamru. On Shabbat evening, it's this little piece from Genesis. On festivals, right, it says it's the piece about God commanding Moses about the various festivals, and so we have a little reading from Torah, and then we have a blessing. The longest of all of them is on Friday night, right, which is sort of interesting, right? Because on one hand, Friday night is not the most important day, whatever, blah blah blah. But we give it a lot of attention. We have a lot of extra blessings that we say on Friday night. So this is one of them, right? And so just to read this particular translation, not saying that this translation is better than other ones, and there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. As I said, very often the first line here is said, Vahir Vahivoker is said in an undertone, and really it starts with Yom HaShishi, right, which means Friday, right? So Friday, that's it. And then we start on Vayachulu, and Vayachulu is the first word associated with the seventh day, right, which is Saturday, is Shabbat, right? And we're finished, right? And we're finished, and we're completed, right? So we have this sort of notion of the seventh day being a day on which things are complete, right? And we all know, right, that things are not actually complete, right? And we actually know that from our own tradition, right? This sort of notion that God leaves parts of creation unfinished. Why? Right? Because then there's something left for humans to do, right? And again, so we have in this sort of notion of Shabbat a very strong idea of the divine human partnership, right? But in the Bible, of course, that's not the way it is, right? Because in the first chapter of Genesis, everything is completely perfect. That's one of the wonderful things about the first. It's a completely closed economy. Everything works perfectly, right? And there's no trouble in the first. As soon as we get to the second chapter of Genesis, right, there's trouble. But in the first chapter, there's no trouble at all, right? So that heaven and earth were finished, and all their array, right? Siva'am, their array, or their soldiers, or their rank, right? And doggy, and oh, doggy. Okay, and
Hey,
God
Rabbi
finished.
Jim.
Helen, Helen, I'm gonna
Mute me.
mute you if I can find you. Yeah, there we go. And Helen, feel free to unmute yourself if you can mute your dog.
Hey, Rabbi Jim.
Yes, go ahead, Mime.
Can I just say, I am so excited that I can look at this and read now.
Isn't it unbelievable?
Oh, it is
makes
so
it-
delightful. So our class has, for me, pretty well achieved its objectives already. It's
That's
all
amazing.
extra
It's-
good
it-
from here.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
it is amazing. And I think just Mayim, to reflect on that for one moment, right, is that when a person sort of begins to sort of feel that level of comfort, right, and it is also sort of it's a dose of confidence, right, that you can go and look at other texts, and it will, you'll be able to kind of conquer is the wrong word, but you'll be able to manage other texts along the way, and to be assured that you're going to see these words a lot, right? Hashamayim, haaretz, right? Variations on tzivah, right? The word for army. Yom, right? The word Elohim, malachto, which is from malacha, right? Work. Asher and asa are very common words, right? It's remarkable in Hebrew, the first 500 or 1,000 words that in every language, right, you want to learn. There are many more examples of those in Hebrew than in other languages, just because there's not that many other words in Hebrew. Modern Hebrew already, it's a little bit more complicated, but if you're talking biblical Hebrew or prayer book Hebrew, right? You can relatively quickly encounter most of the words that you will encounter. Until you get to the book of Job, or some of the prophets, and then all of a sudden it becomes much more complicated. but not to be, just to understand that you don't need to be intimidated by those things, just you just to remember to use all the tools you have. But thank you for bringing that up. So when we get to the Hebrew part of it, maybe we can come back to this one, because you will see, right, again and again in this particular little section, some very, very important words. Hashvi'i, right, the seventh, by Yom Hashvi'i, the seventh day. By Bot, right, which is that, we talked about it last time, right, which is the same root of Shabbat, right, that stopped, right, ceased or stopping, right, and then Vayvarech, right, that God blesses, God blesses the seventh day. And bless you, Ellen. And bless you, right, and what does God do with the second day? God not only blesses the seventh day, Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i, Vaykadesh Oto, right, and sanctifies it. So what we're doing, right, by reading, and it's very interesting. Very often people will say, well, why do we need to read all of these prayers? Can't we just say Borei Pri Hagafen, right, and be done with it? And certainly you can, right? But to sort of get into a mindset, right, where in mythical terms, right, the first Shabbat came. And why did that first Shabbat come? It came because God ceased working, right? So we ourselves take a pause from whatever it is our usual day contain, our usual weekday contains, right? We take a pause, and what do? Just like God, we bless it and we sanctify it, right? So to be reminded, right, that we are, we are doing according to our tradition just what God did on the first Shabbos. We're doing now on the, whatever Shabbos this is since the creation of the world. We could count them up if we wanted to, right? In mythical terms. But just the fact that this is what we are doing, this is what Jews across the world are doing, right? And so to save a few moments, right, and not delay dinner by a minute and a half, so that we can say, this little passage from the Torah, and then the other part of the Kiddush, which we'll get to in a minute, right? That there's, okay, so we've saved 2 minutes, but we've also lost this sort of echo of eternity. And why does God do this? Why does God bless the seventh day and make it holy, or to sanctify it? Right here, they translate it as that God declares it holy. Right? Why? Kivo, because on it, Shavat Mikol Melachto, right? Because God ceased all of God's work. Asher bara Elohim la'asot, which God had created to do. Right, so, and in this final little bit, right, we get this, again, this sort of somewhat paradoxical attitude towards work on Shabbat. Right? What does it mean to say that God created work to do? Right? It's not just that God stopped creation, right? Although that is true, that God stopped creation, right? Or ceased from the work of creation, but literally, right? God ceased from creating, he ceased from the work that God had created to do, meaning that there is still work to do, right? We remember just a few minutes ago, I was saying that, the tradition suggests that God created more work than God was able to do in the first 6 days of creation, right? There was what left over. Why did God leave work left over to do? Right? in part, right, because God had made humans, right, and humans had work to do. And one of the most, just in thinking associatively, one of the most interesting things about, for me at least, about Paradise Lost, John Milton's Christian epic about the loss of paradise, right, is that in paradise, according to Milton, right, Adam and Eve have work to do, right? Whereas in the Jewish imagination, right, there is no work to do, right? Shabbat is the foretaste of the world to come, right? On Shabbat we don't work, right? Which sort of suggests that Shabbat on its own, right, is not really enough, right? Shabbat is really really only functions as Shabbat if it's a break from the work that we do in the world and not a state of stasis, right? If it becomes just the way, if it, we couldn't live in a world that was only Shabbat, although we can dream about it, right? And we do dream about it. Right? We can sort of imagine, oh, it would be so great to live in a world that was only Shabbat. But the fact of the matter is that even God created work that was left to do, so that when Shabbat was over, God would have what to do with himself after that, right? And humans are the same way.
But how could you enjoy Shabbat if everything was Shabbat?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right, Lori, right? That Shabbat can only really function as a rest, right? If it's actually, if we know that we will end our rest and move on to the next thing, right? Vacation,
Context.
right? It's all context, right? Vacation. The point of vacation is not just to escape work, although, it is, right? It's also to recharge ourselves to do whatever it is we're going to do after we get back from vacation, right? And I don't mean work in the sense of working for money, right? I mean whatever our normal day-to-day occupations are.
Right.
Because many of us,
yourself feel important.
I'm sorry?
I think you need something to do,
right,
to feel worthwhile and important.
Right, to have some sort of meaning in our lives, right? To make meaning out of our lives. It's, people, I was very worried, about my father, because when he was working, he was a workaholic. And so I was very worried about what is he going to do when he retires? He's done great. He's found so many things to do that are really meaningful for him. And I think he's really, retirement has been on the whole a very positive experience for him, because he gets to be active and productive without the stress of the working world.
Here.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing we do, right, is that we raise so the idea, right, is that we've already put wine or grape juice into our Kiddush cup, right? And generally people will stand, although sitting is also fine, right? And we say this one-liner, right? Baruch atah, which probably most people know, right? Baruch atah Adonai Elokeinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen, right? And we've already discussed this, right, in terms of the partnership between God and humans, in terms of producing juice from the raw materials of the grapes, or wine from the raw material of the grapes. Right? So in a minimalist Kiddush, right, you would light the candles and say the candle lighting blessing. You would say this Borei Pri Hagafen, and then you'd move right on to Motzi, right? But again, you'd be missing the sort of echoes with divine practice in human practice, and then you would also miss this, this part of the prayer, the sanctification, right? So Mayim here again, you can probably make head or tails of much more of this than you used to be able to, right? And again here, right, you'll notice at the very beginning of the blessing, right, that we say not just Melech HaOlam, right, but Asher Kiddishanu B'Mitzvotav, right, right, that we are fulfilling a mitzvah, right? And what's the mitzvah that we're fulfilling? To sanctify Shabbat, right? That we are emulating God in blessing and sanctifying the day. All right, so let's look at the translation, right? So we praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvahs, right? And also favors us with the holy Shabbos, right? Lovingly and graciously bestowed upon us, right? A memorial of the act of creation, right? So we've already sort of noticed, right, that our little biblical passage that we've read, right, the Vayachulu passage, that comes from creation, right? So we already know, right, that Shabbat is as it is in Hebrew. I'll pull up this, and so we'll sort of Yom Techila Lemikra Kodesh Zecher. Oh, sorry. Zikaron Lema'aseh V'Reishit. Right. So it's a memory or a memorial of the acts of creation. How do they translate it here? The act of creation. The acts of creation, right? The ma'aseh. Right. So what's a maisa in Yiddish?
It's a story.
It's a story. Thank you, Sandy. Right. So we have this very interesting sort of collision of words, right? So it's ma'aseh, right, which can be the story of creation, right? Right. It's a memorial of the story of creation, but it's also the word ma'aseh is also actions, right? So it's also the act of creation. It's both the story and the act that we're remembering when we are sanctifying Shabbat, right? And so it reminds us, right, that what are we doing on Shabbat? We're taking a break from all of our creative work, right? And we're allowed to and encouraged to tell stories about what we do, right? All right, because this was the day, right, of the first Yom Techila, right? It's the first day, right, that people gathered, right? It's the first of the holy assemblies. Remember when we looked at the book of Numbers, we went through all of the holidays, right? When we went through the holidays, what was the first holiday that we encountered? It was Shabbat, right? It was Shabbat, right? The first one we were worried about, right, is Shabbat, right? We went from the everyday sacrifices, right? And then the first holy day of convocation is Shabbat, right? Because it happens, 48 or 52, days a year or whatever it is, or how many every days a year? It was 12, right? So it's 52 or 56 days a year, or 48 or 50. I'm sorry, I can't do
Every
math.
week.
Yeah. Lori, I need you to do the math for me. Yeah. So, we do.
Jim,
Yes, Ellen.
which word is Egypt? How do you say Egypt in Hebrew?
Mitzrayim.
Mitzrayim. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but we're about to, right? We're about to. What?
Mitzrayim?
Mitzrayim, right here. I've just circled, Ellen, I've just circled it.
Okay. That means
Okay, so, and thank you, Ellen, you've pushed us, right, to the next little piece, right, which is that Shabbat is not just about creation, right? Shabbat is also, right, a zecher, also a memorial or a remembrance of Litziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt, right? So, and that is not only because Shabbat is a mitzvah, right? And God is the one that gives us the mitzvahs to do, right? But also because what were we not able to do in Egypt?
Our
Yes.
God.
Rest.
We weren't able to rest. I mean, Anne is correct also, right? We weren't able to worship God, right? We weren't able to worship our God, and we weren't able to rest, right? We were slaves, and we didn't have the freedom to worship God in the way that God wanted us to, right? Part of which is by ceasing from work, right? Part of which is to be free people and to cease from work.
So obviously, chronologically, this prayer has a place. And before the Jews were in Egypt, before they left Egypt, this prayer didn't exist. You can't commemorate the leaving of Egypt if you haven't left Egypt.
Yes.
Is there documentation of what early Shabbats would have been like?
Nothing like this.
For sure.
And more than that, I'm not in a position to say. There may be historians who are able to say this. It wouldn't be a terrible idea to try to figure that out, right? But the idea
Never
of
thought about it before.
Yeah,
it's staring at me now.
Exactly, right? So the Shabbat as we know it is the creation of the rabbis, right? It's not a creation of the Bible, right? The rabbis take what's in the Bible, right, and they construct our understanding of Shabbat, right? So in the Bible, right, there is, in the Torah, right, there is an emphasis, right, on these two themes, and that's why the rabbis pick them up, right? In the Ten Commandments, right, the first version, I can never remember which is which, but let's just say, in one of them, in one of the versions of the Ten Commandments, the fourth commandment, which concerns Shabbat, talks about Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? Why do we have Shabbat? We have Shabbat to commemorate the Exodus, right? In the other version of the Ten Commandments, why do we have Shabbat? To commemorate the creation and God's resting on the seventh day, right? So these two themes, right, are completely intertwined in the biblical text. The rabbis just make it explicit that these two things are entwined, right? And in the famous hymn that we sing on Friday nights in Lecha Dodi, right, it says, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, right? That God said these two words in the same utterance. Right? Only God can say two words with one word, but all right. So now, right, then we get to a little bit more of a complicated piece, right? Kivanu v'acharta v'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, right? So because, right, hold on, let me move this up. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. Let's see if I can move this up. Sorry, everybody.
Because?
Say it again.
Does key mean because?
Yeah.
It does?
It does. Key means because or for, right? Because, right? Now, it's not always translated that way, but that's generally, that's how it's understood, right? Why do we do all this? Because you have chosen us and hallowed us, right? Made us holy or sanctified us from among all peoples, right? So that we get this very uncomfortable reminder every Shabbos, right, of this notion of chosenness, which is an ongoing struggle for many Jews to sort of figure out what does it mean to call the Jews chosen.
Well, wouldn't it mean that we were given the Torah?
Well, yes. I mean, I
The
think
Torah is how to be a human. The Torah is how to live a life. It's,
well, it's one version of that, right? The Torah is one source of ultimate wisdom, right? And so it's our path. Now,
Correct.
for many Jews, and I think for many people like me, right, who converted to Judaism, right, this question of chosenness is a little bit less fraught, perhaps, than it is for many people who are born Jewish. In part because we as converts actively chose, right? So I sort of see this notion of chosenness, right, as a very reciprocal sort of activity, right? That it's I mean, it's a little bit chutzpah, right, to say that because I chose Judaism, God chose me to be Jewish. Who knows, right? Very, very complicated. But this has been this issue of chosenness obviously has been a big a burden for a lot of Jews, not least of all because people, non-Jews will say, look, you guys think you're better than everybody else because you're the chosen people, right? And so I'm just raising it not because I buy that, but because it might come up in your conversations with people, and it might have been something that has come up for you in the past and you're uncomfortable with. If that is the case, there are versions of the Kiddush that do not involve this line. And if you are interested in receiving them from me, please let me know, and I'm happy to get them to you. The Reconstructionist movement is, by and large, as a movement, very uncomfortable with chosenness. And so their Shabbat evening bencher has either as an option or as its primary version of this prayer is a Sephardic version that does not include chosenness. So it is.
Your point of view is an important one in helping resolve that, Jim. The mutual chosenness.
Right.
Because it doesn't, with all due respect, it doesn't matter what God chooses if you don't choose to be part of it.
Right. I think that's right. And I also think, right, as Heva seems to be implying, and you can let me know if I'm reading too much into this, right, that it, by this choosing, right, is not it's not the only choice.
Right.
Right.
It was just, this was the group that received Torah.
Right. That we have the Torah and we happen to think that the Torah is pretty cool. And so, we're happy to sort of, emphasize the uniqueness of the way that we serve God and that we live in the world. And people are very welcome to join us by choosing to become part of the Jewish people, or by just emulating parts of our tradition that work for them. So I am, but I admit that I am more comfortable than many with this language of chosenness.
And if you're a woman, you don't belong at all.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, Sandy, that you say that, because Shabbat is one of those commandments, and there are most commandments fall into this category on the basis of it as an assumption, right? But this is one where the Bible actually explicitly includes women, right? That that everybody, right, is included in the commandment. And so there's, so it's addressed to men, right?
Jim, you fell off here for a moment. Could you repeat what you were saying, please?
Sure. What I was saying is that Shabbat is one of those commandments that is clearly inclusive of everyone, right? In the Ten Commandments, it's addressed to men, and it says that everyone in your settlements, your wife and your sons and your daughters, right, and your male servants and your maid servants, and for that matter, your livestock, right, and the strangers that are in your encampments, right? Everybody gets Shabbat, right? It's not a situation where the men get Shabbat and everyone else has to serve them, during Shabbat. And this is where we got that. So we were talking about this last week, right? We were talking about this notion that that everyone needs to participate in making Shabbat happen. So this is why Lori pointed out last week, right? Who does a lot of the Shabbat marketing, right? The black-hatted guys, right? They all go to Wegmans on Friday morning, and they pick up the, they pick up the challahs or the whatever, is needed, or the diapers or whatever. So this one, Sandy, everyone is included, right?
But who does the work? It's the women.
In the work of making Shabbos?
Yes.
I mean, it depends on the house.
Absolutely.
It depends on the
You sit
household.
upstairs, you're not equal in any respect.
Well, I mean, again, there's actually an interesting book I just ran across yesterday as I was trying to clean out my office, and I found a book that I don't know where it came from, but someone had left outside my office, and it's a book about a woman's place in Judaism. So there are clearly people who would disagree with you, Sandy, on that.
That's fine.
But I'm not here to say one way or the other. All I'm saying is, in this regard, right, as regards Shabbat, everyone is included, right, and everyone is supposed to participate in making it. How that works out in specific families, of course, is another question. All right. So you have chosen us and hallowed us from among all of your people by lovingly and graciously bestowing upon us your holy Sabbath, right? What makes us different, right, is that we have Shabbos, right? That we have Shabbos, and, in theory, right, we're going to take that seriously, in whatever way that we take that seriously, and we're going to name that, right? And so we are going to praise you, right? Or we're going to bless you, Baruch Atah Hashem, right? Nikadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies Shabbos, right? We just saw in the little passage above how God sanctifies Shabbos. We're going to, we do that also, and we're going to praise God, right? Or bless wine because we also are, we are emulating God in that. Okay. So this, as I had mentioned, this book is a reform book. So it only includes this next thing sort of as an option after the fact. The texts that I sent you today included as part of the actual ritual. But this is the ritual washing of hands, which you may be familiar with. If not from Shabbat, you might be familiar with it from the Seder, right? On the Seder night, we actually wash our hands twice, right? There's the first time we sort of dip our hands without a blessing.
Can't hear you.
Hold on one second.
Going, so I have it quiet for my meetings.
Good. Okay. We wash our hands once without a blessing, and then we wash our hands again with the blessing, and it's the same blessing on Shabbat that we would say on Pesach, right? On any holiday. So and so this one is, again, it's a It's a mitzvah, right? And what's the mitzvah that we're doing? Nitilat yadayim, right? So, and what does nitilat yadayim mean? It's translated here as to cleanse the hands. In actual fact, nitila is a raising of the hands. So traditionally, what we do, right, is, and you can read that up here, right? Everyone who wants to wash, right, has a cup or a pitcher of water, pours from the water on each hand 2 or 3 times, right? Then refills the water, right? Traditionally, the person who's just done it has a towel in their hand and hands the towel off to the next person, right? Who wipes his or her hands dry and then says this blessing right away, right? And then hands the towel to the next person. Traditionally, right? What we say is that we don't speak after we've said this blessing. No one talks, right? So very often in families, someone will start a nigun, a wordless song, and people sing while everyone is washing their hands. And then the first word you say is the motzi, right? And then you give, and then you make the motzi, and then you can start talking again. It's a nice way to sing together. It's a nice way to have a little bit of focused, quiet time before eating, right? Rather than sort of just conversation. And so it's a nice sort of meditative moment. Oh, sorry, everybody. Let me get rid of this. Let me get rid of this little thing. Okay. All right. And then, and this is actually interesting, worth noting, right? How do we use this? How do we use the salt? Right. So very often, right, we put salt on the challah, right? It's because the challah, right, is in a certain sense, it represents the sacrifice that we would otherwise have been able to make in the temple, right? And one of the things that the priests would do with the sacrificial meat was you sprinkle it with salt, and so we do that with the challah.
Hello?
Oh, excuse me 1 second. We do that with the challah because it's a memory. It makes our houses, right? It makes our tables a kind of mini temple, right? So this is a great example of how rabbinic Judaism took the home rituals and sort of suffused them with elements of the temple ritual to make our houses sort of a little bit of a mini temple, right? So that the rituals that we would perform at home, right, would become kind of, we don't use the word sacrament in Judaism, right? But I can't think of a better word to use in terms of the sanctity of the rituals that we're supposed to be doing at home, right? They become as sacred and as powerful as they would be if we were doing them in the temple, right? So each family becomes their own little family of priests. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that this is important to recognize that it has been our salvation.
Right.
Because if you're living in a community that persecutes you for your religious beliefs, you don't have access to a temple, but you still want to continue and retain who you are. Right. So you do it. I mean, my relatives did it in the Canary Islands for generations, right. Because they were surrounded by Catholics.
Right. And it's just an amazing aspect of our tradition, right? The degree to which Jews have remained Jewish under circumstances which most religious traditions would have disappeared or become completely assimilated into the dominant tradition, right? Because of the necessity for public worship.
Right.
And the fact that, Jews were able to remain Jewish without a synagogue. I mean, that's one of the reasons why a lot of Jews are very Jewish, but they don't go to synagogue, right? It's a real challenge for rabbis and so on and so forth. But you don't need a rabbi to be Jewish, right? And so it's you need traditions in your family more than you need anything else.
So Jim, I have a little digression, but
Please.
it's not really unrelated.
Yeah.
If the Al Netilat Yadayim sanctifies and ritualizes hand washing as part of Shabbat or festivals, in the pandemic, have any rabbinic groups sort of ritualized the increased hand washing that we do in our homes?
Yeah.
To keep everyone safe.
That's an interesting question. I'm sure, given the relentless ritual and liturgical creativity of my colleagues, that yes, people have done it. Given that that's not, it's not something that it's something that I kind of wish I were more attuned to than I am. It's not something that I have specifically encountered. But I will look around. But what I often would use, right, for hand washing is, the traditional hand washing ritual after using the toilet, say, is to use Al Netilat Yadayim, right, and then to say the Asher Yazar prayer, which I don't remember if we covered in this group or not. But it's part of
that.
But it's part of the morning blessings, and it, and one of the sort of obnoxious things about it is that if you go to a yeshiva or you go to an Orthodox synagogue, you'll see it in every bathroom. They stick it up in the bathroom to remind you that you should say this prayer. But I actually find this prayer to be, beautiful, and it talks about the functioning of the human body. And so it would not be so much of a stretch, right, to use that prayer after you've washed your hands to keep you and your family safe. Let's keep everything functioning inside. But there are other prayers. There's a prayer that just came around. I actually meant to send it around in the Minion Bulletin, Lori, but needless to say, I forgot. About the COVID vaccine, where it was something along the lines of, keeping us safe. So that might be one that we could use.
Is there a blessing for taking the vaccine?
Yes.
Yeah, there's many
Yes.
out there.
I'm getting my vaccine tomorrow.
All right, I'll
Shabbat.
try to right after this class, Lori. I'll send it to you. All right, so I'm gonna try to bring us to a close because I want to switch to the Hebrew. But the final blessing, right, is one that we've kind of already discussed, which is Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, right? It's here on the screen, right? And it's, one of the more well-known ones, right? And again, right, just to point out, right, that we're not here talking about, obviously bread does not spring from the earth, right? So again, we are really focusing on the partnership between the divine and the human, right, to create the means of, on one hand, right, of just basic sustenance, right? What, bread is the most, fundamental form of human sustenance, right? And also celebration, right? Because Shabbat is a celebration. And how do we celebrate Shabbat? Right? We celebrate it with food, right? So that's the end of that. All right.
Is there a requirement that the bread be of wheat?
That is a good question. I would assume that that traditionally bread was of wheat or barley or some sort of grain.
Some of the older grains like spelts and zeal.
So they'd be okay for challah.
Yes, they are.
I believe so. I
Yeah.
don't see any reason why it needs to be, specifically wheat flour. That said, I don't know if there are limits, so to speak. I'm not sure to what degree, sorghum bread is okay. I just don't know if there are particular grains that are supposed to be used, or if it can be any sort of bread-like material, so to speak.
I know that whole wheat is acceptable. It doesn't have to be refined.
It certainly doesn't have to be white flour. White flour is also something that's, relatively new to us. All right, so we will close now. I think next week we will look at the, I'm sorry, we didn't get to the Heschel pieces, but let's do those for next week. And then we'll be in Passover. Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
Will you be able
So
to have a class next Friday, Rabbi Jim, with all the Passover prep?
I'm fine to have a class if people are up for it. If people think that they're not going to be present, let me know now and we can postpone. What do people think?
Not like we have anywhere we can go.
I mean, I think in a normal, if we had to meet in person, I would be like, well, maybe we don't want to do that. But since we're not meeting in person, I'm thinking it's probably not impossible to do.
I'm okay with coming.
All right. Anybody else have a problem? Okay. So yeah. So why don't we? Lois, were you saying yes?
No,
No, okay.
I'm gonna be on the
Great.
road,
Great. All right. So I mean, if
but
you
we
can't
can
make
get a
it,
copy of it, but you will
Yeah.
be,
right? If you
Yeah.
can't make it, you can't make it, and it's completely fine, and you can look at it on the YouTube. All right. So we can switch gears now to the to prayer book Hebrew. Anyone who would like to stay is welcome, and we can look at that book. And hold on one second, Ellen. I'm just gonna get rid of my doppelganger there. All right. And yeah, so anyone who would like to stay for prayer book Hebrew, please let me know where you're at and what questions have come up.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Good Shabbos, Lori.
Shabbat shalom.
that's fun.
Shabbat shalom.
All right, Ellen, where are you? Ellen, you're muted though.
Where's the service tonight?
Service is at Goldman, so it'll be on Zoom for you.
Okay.
I'm doing okay in the book. Sometimes I get stumped by some of them, but I
Yep.
recently discovered there are answers in the back. So now
Oh my
can-
gosh, there's
What?
answers in the back. Who knew? Oh my gosh,
Oh my goodness, there are.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Liam. A life-changing discovery.
Where? Where in the back?
So when I'm really stumped, I just go back there and go, what?
That makes perfect sense.
What page is it on?
Just look in the back. You'll find
Look in
it.
the back and you'll find it. Yeah. So we were on chapter 3 last week, or the last time we gathered.
I'm still on chapter 3.
Okay, great.
Well, I think I finished it, maybe barely.
Right.
It was pretty confusing on the these and the two theys and
Yes,
Yeah.
right. So the they is right. So the and, right, we've talked about and, which is
Yeah,
going to be
this.
the letter Vav,
Yeah,
right? And I've mentioned, right, that there will be some shifts along the way, but the ones that are really important now are the and Va, right? And that depends on the letter that is after the end. They, right? They versus these, right? So they, like in many languages, there's a masculine and a feminine form,
mhm.
right? In the prayer book, you're almost always going to see Haim and not Hain, right? It's going to be very rare for you to see a Hain. It probably happens from time to time, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, oh, here's where you see they in the Hebrew. And then Ela, right, is these. All right. And then, so if we look at page 22, right, so two very important pieces of liturgy that they are introducing you to, right? Sim Shalom. So in worship and study, we have two different tunes we tend to use. Sim Shalom Tova Uvaracha Chen V'Chesed V'Rachamim. Right, so that's one of them. The other one is Sim Shalom. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha, and then they add a word. Ba'olam Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. So one of the great things about tunes, right, is that if you get the tune, it makes the words easier to sing. And if you begin to get the words, it makes the tune easier to sing. So they have a nice complementary effect, so to speak. So I will try to, depending on the timing, I will try to make a YouTube of me singing the Sim Shalom in the two versions, and then you can sort of see it. When in your prayer book, you'll have the Sim Shalom, and you can follow through and sing along. And then I recommend when you're at services, right, worship and study or other, when there is a sing along, right, when there's a congregational song, especially now because we're mostly on Zoom, right, I would really encourage you to sing at the top of your lungs behind your mute, right? And because here's a chance to practice. No one's going to look at you funny because you're saying all the words wrong, and no one's going to complain because you're singing off of key. And so it's great practice time. So whenever there is, so if you can say make it tonight for Shabbat evening services, right? There's a lot of singing on Friday nights, right? And here's a chance to sing along and practice your Hebrew, and enjoy singing at the same time. All right, so these words are really important words, right? Sim Shalom, grant peace, right? Sim means to place, right? Put down. Shalom, obviously peace or wholeness, right? Tova is goodness. Bracha, you already know, right? Blessing. Chen is grace, an amazing word, underused in the Jewish context, right? Because of the importance of grace in Christian theology. So many Jews are uncomfortable with the notion of grace, but right here, right in our central prayer, right? Grace is right up there. One of the things we're asking for from God, right? Chesed, right? Loving kindness or compassion or mercy, right? V'rachamim, right? Also compassion, two different words for compassion, mercy, whatever. Remember that rachamim comes from the word rechem, which is the word for womb, right? So there is a tradition, right, that chesed is the sort of masculine compassion and rachamim is kind of the feminine compassion, right? And so everybody is asking for both, right? That there's sort of an ideal in Judaism, right, that everyone would be able to embody the masculine and the feminine ideals at the same time.
What's the feminine one?
Rachamim, right?
Rach-
The last word of the first line on page 22, right? That word for mercy or compassion derives from the Hebrew word rechem, right? Which is the word for womb, right? So the sort of maternal kind of compassion. Okay. All right. And then the Shechianu, right? Again, a very well-known prayer. You've probably encountered it, right? A little bit complicated language because of the profusion of prefixes and suffixes. The first 6 words, of course, are standard. We know them very well, right? Shehechianu, right? The sh is who or that, right? It's the relative pronoun. Hechia means who, has brought us life or made us to be alive. And but that's the Yanu, right? The nu at the end is the direct object suffix, right? So who has made us live or given us life is somehow often how it's translated. Or here you see in the translation they put at the bottom, has granted us life, right? The you already know, the is and, right? Kiyama, right, is to given us sustenance, sustained us, right? And anu again, right, is the direct object suffix, for us, right? Vihigianu, and brought us, right? Carried us, or has it permitted us to reach? It permitted us to reach is a little bit more distant than the word. The word actually is like carried us here, right? Brought us here, right? Lazman hazeh, to this time.
To this what?
To this time,
Oh.
right? Here translated to season. Zman is also, season is fine too. Right, and that translation.
Hello?
That translation suggests, right, season, I think, because this is something that is really associated with holidays, right? That we thank God for bringing us to this season, right? The seasonal celebration, right? So this is something that is said on the first day of holidays, right? So you might be familiar, right, with the tradition that we say this Shechianu blessing, right, on the first night of Hanukkah, when we light the Chanukiah, but we don't say it the rest of the nights. Now, sometimes one of the tricks of the rabbis, right, is to find an excuse to say the Shechianu, right? So how can you justify saying the Shechianu on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, right? Well, you wear a new shirt, right? You have a new shirt for the first day and you have a new shirt for the second day, right? I often like to say the Shechianu on multiple days of Hanukkah, right, when I'm celebrating with a different group, right? So I'm saying the prayers with the worship and study minyan for the first time, so we'll say Shechianu even though it's the 6th night, right? Or I'm saying it with the people in Goldman, and so even though it's the 3rd night, we'll say Shechianu, right? All right. So then in the chapter 4, right? We're on chapter page 23, right? So we have masculine and feminine, right? We have right, and then so you'll do those exercises, right? And then so the vocabulary on page 24. Emet, right? The word for truth, emet. Right? And this is a great word for any number of reasons, right? Not least of all, right, that it contains the first letter of the alphabet, the final letter of the alphabet, and the central letter of the alphabet, right? So there's a tradition, right, that this is the fullness, right? This is the fullness of truth. It's also the word that is carved on the forehead of a golem, right? And everyone know what a golem is? A golem is like a rabbinic robot, right?
Oh.
So the first Adam was a golem until God breathed life into the first person, right? And so the legend of the golem, right, is that is that, superhuman rabbis are able to make, sort of make sort of a Frankenstein's monster kind of a thing, from earth, not from remnants of other people's bodies, but from made out of earth, right? And what do you do to get rid of the golem when you're done with it? You scratch off the aleph, and what are you left with? Met, which is the word for a dead person.
Okay.
So it's very interesting, right? That aleph includes the word for death in it, right? But it also includes, sort of the totality of the alphabet. Okay. So anachnu is the word for we, but also anu is, so probably the word anu if you've been to Yom Kippur services. Anu amecha v'yata, right? That one. So anu is I'm sorry.
I love that tune.
That tune is great.
It's absolutely fabulous.
It's wonderful. It's such a great thing to be able to sing on Yom Kippur.
Oh, it is.
You're flagging and you're falling apart, and then
Exactly. It's just awesome.
It's just what you need.
Yes.
So
those rabbis weren't stupid,
No. They knew what they were doing. All right. So there's the plural form of you, right? Which again, you'll in the prayer book, when you encounter it, you're not going to encounter it too much, right? But you'll see it in the masculine version much more than the Hebrew. And remember, right, the masculine does not exclude women, right? It's the old, the old.
How do you pronounce it?
Atem. Atem, right? It's the masculine form, which means men and women, boys and girls, whatever, males and females, right? Aten is the feminine, right? And that's the restrictive one, right? That's the one that only includes females. Okay. And then ben and bat, right? And their attendant plurals, right? Banim and banot. Right, and again, so everyone is familiar with Ben and Bat, right? Because most people who are Jewish have some sort of a Hebrew name, right? Which is generally at least a patronymic, or whatever the word is for patronymic. Means that it's the father's name, right? Generally in liberal circles, we walk around with, Ben or Bat. Like I'm Ben Avraham V'Sarah, right? People who are converts take in ritual context, right? We take Avraham and Sarah as our parents, but usually it now includes both parents. Although there are still obviously people who go by by just their father's name.
So the plurals Banin and Banot.
Yeah, Banim and Banot, exactly. Banim and Banot. And then obviously, and again, just like Atem and Aten, right? When you see Banim, or in the construct form, it's B'nai, like B'nai Yisrael, right? That is not, you have to remember, right? That does not mean the sons of Israel, as opposed to the daughters, right? It means the children, right? So, so the rabbis make hay with this from time to time, right? They'll say B'nai Yisrael is the sons of Israel, right? And Beit Yaakov, right? The house of Jacob is the girls, right? That's why Beis Yaakov is the Orthodox Jewish day school for girls, is Beis Yaakov, right? That comes from the Bible, right? But in reality, right, in Hebrew, the word banim is children. Right? It's an unmarked or unrestricted form. It includes the girls and the boys. Bat and banot really just means, banot really is the daughters. And then shalom, right? Very important word. right? And okay, so you guys can go through through the exercises, and now that we know, right, that there are answers in the back, thank you, Mayim, again for that. Please don't hesitate to be in touch with me if you don't understand why an answer is what it is. I'm still very happy to engage with you on that, but you can just check your own now. Go ahead, Ellen.
On page 26, when it says sometimes the word who is used after the pronoun atah, and I don't understand that at all. Why would you use the second and third person in the same sentence?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So in Hebrew, right, there is no every once in a while you will see a participle, and in Hebrew the sort of active participle is used as the present tense, right? There really is no present tense in Hebrew, and so we have other ways of expressing it. So one of the ways of expressing it, right, is to use the third person pronoun, right, in the appropriate gender as a form of to be, as a present tense form of to be. Okay. So it means is or are, right? So it's in this case, right, the form is of the pronoun, right? But really it is standing for is or are, and in this case are, right? Atahu hamelech, right? You are the king, right? And if it were a girl, right, it would be Ati hamalka, right? You are the queen. And I think I'm trying to, now of course I'm doubting myself, but give me 1 second, I'll be right back. You'll see this in the end of the Shabbat service, right? Shabbat, and you see this in the end of the Shabbat, and you'll see this at the end of Shabbat and holiday service for right after Musaf, right? In Kelohenu, the last verse of Ein Kelohenu, right, which is there is none like our God, right? The last verse is Atahu Elohenu, right? You are our God, right? Atahu Adonenu, you are our master. Atahu Malkenu, you are our king, and Atahu Moshienu, you are our savior, right? So if you ever get confused about it, Ellen, just remember Ein Kelohenu. That's where you'll see it. Okay.
Okay.
Great. All right. And then finally, on page 29, we see the Elenu. I just anticipated. I could have just turned to page 29 for Atahu Eloheinu, because there it is at the bottom. Yeah. Okay. As far as I know, Ellen, that's the only place that it pops up in the prayer book, but it might show up other places. I'm just not thinking.
Okay.
But yeah, so here, right, we see the Vav in the Elenu. This is actually great, right? Va anachnu, and right, we. And now be sure, you should know, right, that the Vav is included in many more words in Hebrew than we would use and translate into English. If we translated every time there was a Vav, meaning and in Hebrew, if we translated it into English, we would have so many ands in our translation that we'd be completely overwhelmed, right? So very often because in English, right, we can use a comma, right? And we don't actually need to introduce our sentences with an and, the way that is often done in biblical and prayer book Hebrew. So va'anachnu korim, so we bow, umishtachavim, right? And here it says worship, but it actually also means bow. Actually, so korim often means bend, right? So korim means we bend our knees, right? And mishtachavim means we bow, right? So when we do the Aleinu, right, we bend our knees first on korim, and then we bow at our waists at mishtachavim umodim, right? So you'll notice, right, that the u here means and. Right? So it's another, so just don't get confused. Even though it sounds u, it's another form of vav, right? It's another form of vav. Before a mem, you don't say v modim, you say umodim. And there's a couple other letters before which you would never use v. You wouldn't say v. You would say ooh. Other questions on chapter 4? Go for it. If you haven't done it already. If you've already done it, then do chapter 5. You guys are getting so good at this.
I wish.
The main thing is just to, and again, that you got to go, Lois. Great to see you. Thank you. We'll talk. Great. The main thing is to take advantage of Zoom services for as long as we still have them, right? To practice your Hebrew out loud and just to be shamelessly bad. And knowing that, if you're willing to be shamelessly bad, that you will get good over time. And that it takes some time. It takes some time. And all right, any final questions?
No.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi
Shabbat
Jim.
shalom.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos, see you soon.
Good
Bye-bye.
job.